thank you for coming. The Master Gardeners are a volunteer organization here in Napa County. They're all over the state of California, actually. Master Gardeners are throughout the United States as well. It is a volunteer program that does home gardening education based on research-based information. So we have lots of great information for you tonight. We're going to do a little bit talking about tree care and tree appreciation, and then finish up with our wonderful walk in the park. We hope you can join us. So welcome to the program on tree appreciation. First of all, I just want you to think for a moment about the things you notice as you drive around our beautiful valley. When you go up the Silverado Trail, you might notice off to the side the open oak woodlands that we see on our drier hills on the east side of the valley. These are open oak woodlands with a lot of blue oaks and beautiful golden grasses. As you look on the other side of the valley, as you go up the Highway 29, you'll see a denser forest filled with firs, redwoods, and madrones. A little cooler on that side of the valley. As you cross the valley on the valley floor, you see the beautiful majestic valley oaks and other large trees. When you park in parking structures, areas that have wonderful shade trees, you might notice the trees that are shading the parking lot, and certainly we are attracted to parking in the shade, keep our cars cool, especially on the hot summer days. You might also notice a line of these trees, like cypress trees, that beckon you forward, welcoming you into a property or a location. You might notice trees like these pear trees that are clustered in a lawn area to provide an outdoor space, outdoor room. Or you might notice some of these beautiful, majestic oak trees in the background here. You can see a bit of a beautiful big oak tree. And in the front, there's a couple of small trees in a planter that are very interesting trees. You might notice their texture and form. You probably all know where this is. As you drive through that wonderful corridor of trees, there have been some issues with those trees, but they're still hanging in there. And it definitely creates a visual journey as you travel through those trees. So today we're going to talk about awareness of trees, just sort of general appreciation, some of the benefits that trees give us, our responsibility as tree owners and for tree care, the obligation that we have if we do plant a tree, and a little bit on advocacy or support for trees and trying to get more trees out there. We respond to trees with all of our senses. We have 5 senses: our sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Think about trees that you've seen. Beautiful color of flowers. In the springtime, we see lots of color from different types of flowering trees. We also see fall color from the leaves as they change in color in the early and late fall. Shapes of trees. We have all different kinds of trees that create beautiful shapes and have different either natural or man-made shapes. We notice trees also for just their size. They can be very large and tower over us and give us a sense of belonging and connectedness. We can hear trees when they blow in the breeze. I have some very fond memories of the sound of wind whistling through pine trees. Always makes me think of being in the mountains and camping. Or when we have a really windy night. I live down in American Canyon. We get a lot of really strong winds in the evenings and afternoons, and sometimes as I listen to my trees creaking, I get a little nervous, but it certainly is a sensory event. We also have texture, all the different leaf shapes and sizes and textures. The leaves can be sharp or smooth or fuzzy. And bark as well. We have wonderful trees that have thick, craggy bark. We also have barks that peel, and we have some beautiful smooth barks, the wonderful smooth barks on the eucalyptus trees or some of our aspens. Those all provide us with a sensual textural. Fragrance is another thing, the smell of trees. My voice changed. As trees flower in the springtime, we get the wonderful smells of the different types of flowers. Early in the season, we get the magnolias, fruit trees blooming. Different fruit trees will bloom at different times, and so we'll get different aromas from those trees. Certainly as the citrus blooms, I always know when the citrus is blooming in my yard, I can really smell it even if I don't see it blooming. The fragrance of the trees is beautiful. And then as the fruit ripens into the summertime, we get the aromas of the different fruits as they ripen. So you can smell the peaches and the plums sometimes, Also the fruit as it matures, and fig trees, for example, you can smell the leaves as well as the fruit. If you've ever been under one of those really big fig trees where you go up underneath and they create a wonderful shade that has that wonderful fig aroma. And then as we get into the warm part of summer, we often smell the resins and the pitch that kind of warms up in the sun, and that warm smell in the afternoon. And then as we get into the fall, we get the musty smells of leaves as they fall into the ground. There's a lot of different fragrances we get from trees. Taste, of course. We have all of our wonderful fruit and nut trees that provide us edible fruits and nuts. We also have tinctures and teas and spices that come from trees. So there's a lot of different ways we can taste trees as well. So some of the other things we notice besides just those major senses is also very majestic or large trees. I bet everybody knows where this tree is. We all drive past it and really enjoy the structure of this beautiful big eucalyptus tree. It's over 200 feet tall. It has a 29-foot diameter. And of course it has that huge burl on the side of it that's very interesting and causes us to always wonder, well, it's like, what is that and how does that happen? It's a really interesting and wonderful tree. We also notice the age of trees. This beautiful big oak tree has been managed well so that it's very old and yet still structurally sound. You can see and tell that it's old by all of the moss and lichens growing on it. But it's also been managed so that it's not a problem and it's not causing trouble. We also sometimes notice unusual shapes of trees, whether it's a natural shape that just naturally has curves and burls, as in the olive trees on the right-hand side, or whether it's a tree that has some interesting structure by the way that we've managed it or pruned it. And that's a Japanese pagoda tree with John Hoffman standing next to it. The trees also provide us with surroundings or framings. This is a beautiful photograph that's framed by trees, but also you can see how the house itself is framed by different types of trees, with the very columnar trees providing some structural focus. We have a palm tree in there that provides interest, and then the background trees as well frame the house. We also notice beautiful forms of trees. Some of the older trees that can get quite large can provide these beautiful structural forms. This is a sunset looking through a beautiful big oak tree. It certainly causes me to feel relaxed just looking at that beautiful shape and form. The foliage of trees throughout the year can change and cause all sorts of different emotions, I think, as we see things in the spring coming out with a fresh, bright green or reddish foliage, and then as it goes into the summer, we get the full dark greens and lighter greens as the newer leaves come on. And then into the fall, when things start to change with the seasons. I know the beautiful ginkgo trees, as they turn bright yellow gold, are just gorgeous in some years. And then we have, this is a maple tree, changing color. And certainly all the different types of flowers. We have all kinds of flowering trees, some that have big beautiful flowers like this magnolia that come out before the leaves, so they're really spectacular, and some that come out after the leaves have come on so that you don't see them quite as much, but they certainly provide color and interest in the garden. Trees also provide really wonderful contrast. Here we see a beautiful dogwood that's framed by a bark of the valley oak, that dark, sturdy bark behind this sort of frail-looking understory tree. Some of the obvious benefits that we get from trees, of course, sources of food for us, fruits, nuts, herbs, spices, as well as windbreaks. Windbreaks are a really great use of trees and have been used in many places all over to help stop wind or slow it down or provide a break and structure away from the wind. We can use it for protecting our homes as well as agricultural land. And trees do a great job of really slowing the wind without causing any other problems. Shade for patios and parking areas. Shade can be really beneficial to not only parking lot areas where we have heat islands and you can get some very warm temperatures from the reflective heat of the black asphalt, but also in patio areas. Having a shade tree can really make your patio much cooler and make it a place where you want to spend time rather than staying inside with the air conditioning. property line delineation. So a property, you don't necessarily always want to put up a big wall to screen in your property, but this way you can see the palm trees here really frame this property. They show you where the property line is, but they still keep that space open as a framing for the beautiful background. This is called a borrowed landscape. That's not part of the landscape, but it certainly enhances the landscape by having us be able to look through with the frame of those palm trees into the surrounding hillsides. Trees also make really nice screens for properties, for hiding buildings we don't want to see or other structures. If you have a neighbor's shed that you just really don't want to see, you can put in some nicely placed trees and sort of camouflage that without having to put up a structure that's a permanent structure. Housing materials, we use all the wood, of course, comes from trees, and we use it for our housing as well as our feathered friends. All kinds of wonderful furnitures, playing things for kids, tools, and sports equipment. All kinds of things are made out of wood. Fencing, whether living fencing as in an espalier or the actual structure of the fence. We have a living and a non-living fence here. This is at the previous copia garden. That's a quince that's been trained into the trellis to create a fencing area. We also use trees for paper pulp. It's a huge use for trees, and it's all the paper that we use in all the parts of our lives comes from trees. And we also can use that same kind of pulp for creating some types of clothing too. Some of the more subtle benefits of trees. Protection from the sun, not just for in parking areas, but trees actually evaporate water out of their leaves and create a cool environment. So not only do they provide shade in a garden area, but they also provide a cooling effect. We all know that sitting under a shade umbrella versus sitting under a tree has a very different feel to it. And that's because of a couple of reasons. One, you get the filtered light coming through, but you also get that cooling effect from the actual trees losing water and cooling the environment. This is important for our gardens as well as us. Creates a cool and wonderful environment for many of our plants as well as us to lay and relax. Trees clean the air. They're up in the atmosphere. They reduce the amount of carbon dioxide by absorbing the carbon dioxide, but they also absorb other pollutants and particulate matter. So they can actually clean the air. This is part of why trees are so beneficial and helpful in city areas, although we usually try to squeeze them into spaces that are too small for them, but they really do have a big benefit on cleaning the air for us and do a lot to take some of the major pollutants out of the air. They can provide a wonderful noise barrier or buffer. As in this picture, you can see there's 3 layers of plant material here. We have the low-growing shrubs, and then we have small to medium-sized trees and then larger trees. By having these 3 layers of plants, we can actually create a very good sound buffer. It really captures a lot of the noise from the road and isolates it so that we don't have to hear it in our homes. Trees provide wonderful habitat for all kinds of animals. Some of them we think of as pests, but they're still out there enjoying the trees. We have all of course the birds using them, but also insects and other animals eating the trees and using the fiber and using it as a hiding place or a structure for building their homes. And trees provide biodiversity to our gardens. By providing many different levels of heights of plants and types of plants, we create wonderful gardens that have diversity of locations for all kinds of insects and animals. And this creates a very diverse population of both beneficial and pest insects, and we tend to have less pest problems if we have lots of beneficial insects and animals that can help control the pests. So providing biodiversity is really helpful and important. Trees are really wonderful for our riparian areas. In our local riparian areas, we can plant trees that will tolerate the wet soils near creeks and riparian areas, but that will also hold the soil in with their roots. They help filter the soil. They provide leaf litter to enhance and fertilize the soil. And they create a shady, cooling environment for the rivers and streams that's really important for fish and other animals that are living in the water. To keep the water cool and make it less of a hot, sunny environment really enhances the riparian area. Trees are very useful for erosion control. along the sides of vineyards and on hillsides. The roots help the water go into the soil, infiltrate into the soil. They maintain the soil from washing away, but they also help it absorb. And that really helps keep the water from washing away the soil, creating mudslides and soil washing off into the streams. Trees certainly create a peaceful setting for us. I think we could all visually relax just looking at this picture and imagine how calm and quiet it is in that peaceful setting. Trees, again, because they're buffering the sound, but also providing that cooling effect. And just having green plants around you really is helpful as well as keeping us peaceful and relaxed from our busy day. So what's our role in maintaining trees? They give us all these wonderful things and wonderful enhancement to our environment, but we need to do a little bit to help maintain and protect them as well. This picture by John Swanson illustrates some of the parts of what we do for trees and what they do for us. At the top we see a couple planting a tree. Proper planting is really important. Watering and keeping the tree secure and well watered. Managing it and managing the soil around it is important, and you can see in the bottom three pictures shows some habitat creation, animals and birds enjoying the trees, a man enjoying the shade underneath the tree, and eating the fruit off the tree. So here's a couple of examples on the left-hand side. We have some trees that it's obviously a somewhat commercial planting. There's multiple olive trees here. They've been protected, they've been planted correctly. The plastic collar around the base of the tree helps protect it from small rodents that can come and girdle trees or chew the base of the tree and damage it while it's getting established. You can see that there's side supports here for the tree, but they're loose. They have a loose connection to the tree so that it can wiggle a little. That's important for the tree structure. We want it to be able to move a little bit as it grows. It will actually strengthen the tree. You don't want it to be so secure that it can't move at all. It also has irrigation, which is really important. Once we plant the tree, it's going to take quite a long time for the roots to become established and grow into the soil that we planted it into. We want to irrigate it until it gets well established, and then thereafter you need to still probably occasionally water the tree. On the right-hand side is a sadder tree. It's not been taken very well care. It looks like it was planted probably originally. It might have been planted correctly. There were some stakes put there to support the tree, but it's no longer tied to them, and it may not be supported in any way. It doesn't look like it's supported by those stakes, so they should probably just be removed. And I also don't see any irrigation, so this tree is sort of left on its own in this very dry environment. And if you look at the top of the tree, it doesn't look particularly healthy at this point. I don't know what time of year this was taken, but it looks like a really dry spot, and it looks like that tree is really drying out. So this tree may not survive. So about staking. As I mentioned, when we stake a tree, you don't always have to, but for many of our landscape trees, when we plant them, they have fairly tall, top-heavy shapes. This is the way they're grown in the nursery. They're typically grown in containers and with a lot of trees around them. So they tend to have this kind of long, spindly growth, and that will make them weak when we initially plant them. They also, as we're planting them into soil, they just have a ball of root. They don't have an extensive root system to hold them up. So we usually need to stake them and support them initially. The tree on the right here, you can see there's two stakes. Now if we had a prevailing wind, for example, if the wind was coming across from one side or the other, as in our valley, we tend to have the wind mostly coming from one direction. You want to put your stakes directional. So the stakes would be, the wind would be coming right towards the stake. So in this picture, the wind would be going across here. And that way the tree is supported to wiggle back and forth. If you put it the other way, it's going to tend to push back and forth and more likely to fall over. But by having it wiggle a little, just like when we do physical therapy and build our muscles, it's the same with the tree. It needs to wiggle a little to build its strength. And it will actually get better taper, which means it will have a flare at the base, which gives it strength, if you allow it to have a little bit of wiggle. So what they've done here is they're using a rubber tie that actually ties to the post, but allows the tree to move. This unfortunate tree's down here. It looks like they may have had, there may be some supports on these two trees, but this one obviously is lacking, and it doesn't have any support, so it's now leaning towards the building. If it's not ever fixed. If nobody comes by and puts a support stake on here, it's probably going to be taken out because it's leaning towards the building, so it's going to become a problem. It's, again, top heavy. I heard a really great presentation by a man who plants a lot of street trees, and he said he has to fight people on this, but when he plants his trees, they have little branches going all the way to the ground almost. They look almost like a shrub. He said, think of it. The tree is getting energy from every single leaf that you leave on it. So if you've got a really bushy tree and you plant it as a baby tree, it's going to grow much faster because it's got a lot more energy coming in. And then you can go back and trim off those branches later. So he said he usually, when he plants trees, he leaves them bushy for about 2 to 3 years. He'll come back and later trim the trees up to have the lowest permanent branch. But what often happens is you buy a tree, it looks like a little lollipop with a poof on the top and then a skinny stem. But the more leaves you can leave on there, the faster it's going to grow and you'll get it established more quickly. Pruning. Pruning is really important, especially for when you move into a location that already has trees. If you're not planting new trees, pruning can be really important to help the tree really grow at its best and to remove problems. In these two pictures, we see one on the left-hand side that was pruned properly. It is leaning towards the house, but it's been managed well. It doesn't look like it's going to be a problem. They are probably going to continue to trim this tree on this end to make sure that it doesn't get too much weight so that it would fall into the building. But this is a nice old oak tree that's been well pruned. Woo! This tree on the other side here, this right-hand side tree, is pruned as we've seen lots of this kind of pruning along Silverado Trail under the high power lines. They're pruned for a purpose. They want to keep them away from those high power lines so we don't have fire issues. But this is a pine tree, which is very flammable, so we do want to keep it away from the wires. Unfortunately, the tree was probably planted there a long time before the wires went in, and it was able to grow up and then now has had to be pruned back. This is not a good pruning for this tree. These trees typically want to look like a big triangle, not a U. So what's probably going to happen eventually, this tree is stressed because of this type of pruning. It will not be healthy, and eventually it will probably die or have to be removed. Sunburn is another thing that we have to think about when we're pruning trees or working on trees. If you're removing a lot of leaf tissue during the hot summertime, trees can get sunburned just like we can. The trees need or are used to having a lot of shade on their bark. They may not have very thick bark, and when you remove it, it can then get a lot of direct sun that will cause the tissue to die. So the one on the right-hand side here has been exposed to sun on this side. This is probably west facing. In that late afternoon, that very hot sun hits the bark. The bark is not very thick on most trees, and right underneath the bark is the living tissue. So if you get that really hot afternoon sun, it can actually kill that tissue on the tree on that side. And this will often mean that the top, if we were to go up to the top of this tree, we would see on that side the growth was much less because there's less water coming up to support the tree branches. The other trees, and I apologize, the picture's a little bit blurry, but you can see a row of trees here. They look like they can easily be hit by that late afternoon sun on the lower part of the trunk, so they've been painted white. This is with a white latex paint. You can use any light colored paint will work. Usually you dilute it down to about thickness of milk and then paint it on the tree trunk. This will help reflect that heat off of the bark and will keep the tree cooler. So it's a way of preventing sunburn. If you're going in to prune a fruit tree that you're trying to prune back a lot and cut it and open it up quite a bit, and you're exposing new branches that haven't had a lot of light on them, especially on things that are thin-barked like apple trees and pear trees, you want to definitely paint it white so that it doesn't get sunburned. Allowing space for trees is really important. I know we've all seen situations, especially around the library here and downtown Napa, where we have some wonderful big trees, this situation where the sidewalk pushes up. If you're trying to walk on that sidewalk, it's a real tripping hazard. It can be really dangerous. I think skateboarders like it though, it gives them a jump. But for most of us, we don't appreciate this uneven sidewalk. And this is just a situation of these trees were planted a long time ago. They've slowly grown and pushed up the sidewalks, and you can see the roots right under there. They can go in and cut these roots and then reset this sidewalk. That's not good for the trees in general. If you cut roots, you're going to be causing damage to the plant. You're opening it up, you're creating wounds, so you can get different kinds of diseases coming in, and actually just cutting the roots will cause, again, less of those ability for the tree to support itself. On the other side, we see a tree that's been chosen quite well. There's a small planter here, but it's a small tree, and they're keeping it small by pruning it. You can tell it's been pruned. So they're keeping it small. Behind it, you can see a couple of large redwoods that they've placed back further from the sidewalk, so they have room to grow. And that's a really good planting. They've chosen the right tree for the right place. Here's another situation we have where we sometimes plant the trees a little bit too close to a structure. On the right-hand side, we have a small tree. Although it is a small tree, it may have been appropriate for that place, but it needed to be planted a little further away from the building. You can see it leaning away from the building to try to get to more light. As it grows, it's going to continue to lean and probably be a problem and eventually taken out. You don't want them right up against the house because they'll rub on the house and cause damage. And also the tree won't get enough light and it won't grow properly. The side against the house is always going to be more flat and the tree's going to be lopsided. As it grows over sidewalks and things, it will probably be a problem. On the left-hand side, you can see some more olive trees that were planted appropriately. They're spaced out nicely. Olives grow really slow, so they don't have to worry about them growing too quickly here. They're spaced out enough to where they're going to grow and fill in that space but not become a problem. They again have irrigation on them, and they have some temporary supports tied on with just green tape, so they're not going to be having those plant supports there for very long. They're just providing a little bit of structure as the tree slowly gets its roots into the soil. Another great choosing the location properly. On the left-hand side, we have a beautiful big willow tree. Willows are very appropriate for places where you have a water table and you get a lot of soil moisture. We can tell this is a wet area. You can kind of see some cattails in the background here. So this situation is a great spot for a willow tree. It's going to need a lot of water, but there obviously is water there. And so it's a really good planting. It has space to grow. There's no planters or sidewalk or patio underneath it, so that you don't have to worry about cleaning up afterwards and cleaning up the leaves. On the other side, we have a small garden that they obviously have a big tree here, so they wanted to plant some more trees to plant for some shade, and I appreciate that they wanted to plant trees. But if you look at how many trees they have planted in this fairly small garden, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe a few more over here. And if you look closely, those are redwood trees. Those are going to get to be huge trees. And for a small yard like that, I don't think even one redwood tree would probably fit too well. So they got a little carried away. So at some point, they'll probably have to take out several of these to allow some of the other ones to grow, or maybe replace them with a different tree. So plant choice is really important. They could have probably done better with some other types of trees that wouldn't get nearly as large as the redwoods. Creating shade around our homes is really helpful and beneficial. You can reduce your fans and electrical use and air conditioning by up to 40% if you have a nice shade tree. And if you have a deciduous tree, which will give you sun in the wintertime and shade in the summertime, that's ideal because you will lower your heating costs as well. This is a well-placed tree. It's obviously an old, mature tree. It was probably there before the house was built, but maybe not. That's a pretty old-looking house. The house on the other side, on the right-hand side, has no trees. It's a newer housing planting area. They don't look like they've planted any shade trees at all in this housing complex, and I have to say I'd rather live in the shady one. The other one is going to be fine if you have a big air conditioner, but it's going to be hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Cultivation. So if we do have big trees and we want to take good care of them, we have to properly cultivate around them. If we have a tree that has a nice kind of duff area where the leaves have dropped, this is a really nice way that they've handled this. They've got a little bench in here so you can sit and enjoy the shade of the tree, but there's no plantings up against the tree, which is really helpful. If you have lots of small plantings under the tree, you're going to be putting a lot of water under there, and it's not going to be great for the tree. On the other side, we have a bad example. This oak tree was probably here long before this lawn was put in. The lawn was put in around the tree, providing a nice, moist, cool environment with probably daily or at least a couple times a week watering. That's not how the tree probably originally grew there. It was probably adapted to a very dry location, and now that you've provided water on a regular basis, it's going to increase a lot of problems for roots, as well as diseases and other problems with this tree. You're also creating a very humid environment when you have that lawn in there. You're going to have a lot of evaporation from the lawn, and that's going to probably be causing problems with the top of the tree as well. I would guess that this tree will probably die over the next 5 to 10 years and be taken out. So unfortunately, we often like to have a shady tree in a lawn area. But if you put the lawn right up to the tree like this, it's probably not going to survive. I also don't know what this post is. I think this is a warning for a gas line or something, which seems to be right next to the tree as well. Ideally, this tree, they would have put in like a nice mulched area that just went out a ways from the tree. The other problem with lawns going right up against trees is that we often want to trim the grass away from the tree, and most of the time people will do that with a weed whacker or some kind of string trimmer, and that will often girdle the tree or nick the bark of the tree and cause problems. Next is maintenance. We want to be sure and maintain the area around the tree and the trees themselves. Proper watering is important, and then also if we have fruit trees, we want to clean up any fruit that drops to the ground. We want to pull off the dead fruit if it doesn't come off of the tree. That will help prevent a lot of disease problems and pest problems. If you have this much dead fruit around the base of the tree, you're going to get not only a lot of fruit flies, but you're going to get raccoons and possums and deer and everything else coming in to eat those, rats. And so you really want to clean up underneath the fruit trees. There's several different diseases that can get spread by fruit on the ground that'll go back up into your tree and cause you problems in next year's crop, like brown rot and some of our other fungal diseases. On the right-hand side, I put in a picture of a couple of tree borers. These are insects that crawl inside the tissue of the tree and will chew around inside the tree and eventually kill the tree. They tend to only attack trees that are drought or water stressed. These particular ones are ones called long-horned borers that go into eucalyptus trees, but we also have a lot of other borers that will go into peach trees and some of our other fruit trees. Again, if the trees are water stressed or drought stressed, they're going to be more likely to get these kinds of beetles. So we want to keep our trees watered appropriately. Not too much water, but enough water to keep them healthy. If a tree is healthy and these insects crawl inside, they will actually be pushed out by the pitch. If the tree has enough energy and moisture, it will actually push the insects out, and so they will have less ability to crawl inside the tree and cause problems. The very last thing on this slide here is this picture. Does anybody know what this is? Do you recognize that? That's a peach leaf. It's kind of lumpy and red. This is peach leaf curl. This only occurs on peaches and nectarines, and it's a fungus disease. So it does well in years when we have moisture or a lot of spring rain. So you might have noticed if you have a peach tree that we didn't have much of this for the last few years when we had our drought years. We actually had very little peach leaf curl for the last 4 years, but this year, because we had quite a bit of spring rain, we got really hit hard with this. So if you had peach trees, you probably had peach leaf curl this year. May not have had it the last couple years. And it is a challenge to control because by the time you see it like this, it's too late to do anything about it. So this is one of those things where you have to keep a good calendar or a good journal so that you know that you had it last year and that you can treat your trees during the winter time when they're dormant. Once they go into leaf, you can't really treat very well for this problem. So keeping up on the maintenance and just keeping good records of how your trees are doing and what kinds of problems you're seeing and being proactive to try to prevent some of them. And this is just a couple of slides of other things that we need to do to help take care of our trees. We want to use our trees for shade and for all the wonderful things they give us, but using them as a signpost is not really the best use for a tree. By doing this many nail holes in this tree, they've created lots of holes in there. Trees can heal themselves, but every time you poke a hole in the trunk or the base of a tree, you're introducing the possibility of damage and more problems. And if you actually look at this tree at the base, you can see there's been some other issues with the base of this tree. I don't know if cars are hit it or what, but there's a lot of bark missing on the base of this tree. So there's a few issues on there. I think that's why they put this reflector on there. I think this might be at the end of a road. It's getting hit by cars. And you'll see this often on trees that are in roadsides like this. They will have a lot of bark at the base missing for that reason. The other photo on here is of ivy growing up into a tree. It may look attractive for a while, but then at some point the tree gets pretty well covered with the ivy. The ivy can create a lot of weight in the tree that's not normally there, so it can cause problems with limbs and things falling off. It also creates a lot of moisture up on the trunk, which can then cause rot and problems with the trunk and the base of the tree. So where to find more information? You can always go to our Master Gardener website. And if you picked up a card when you came in for the Master Gardener website is on that card. You can always email or call our help desk. We man a Master Gardener help desk on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to noon, year round. You can always come in and bring a question or email or call us. We also have a couple of great reference books. The reference book on the side here is our Master Gardener Trees to Know in Napa Valley book. And we created this book to help people appreciate trees. It was originally started because we had a wonderful Master Gardener who was a true tree aficionado, and he loved to write about trees, and so we created a collection of essays. We added to the back of the book some wonderful maps on places where you can go and see magnificent mature trees, and all in this area of downtown Napa. The other book that I put up here is a really wonderful reference. When we decided to redo our book, we needed to update it about a year and a half ago. We talked about trying to put in even more descriptors of the trees so that you could really recognize them. But this other book by Matt Ritter already does that. And so if you don't have this book and you want a book that really tells you about trees, gives you lots of great photos, we have some samples of the book here so you can look at it. I don't know if the library has that book, but in here he talks about all the trees that are appropriate for California, Southern California as well as Northern California, so you have to be a little bit careful with that. We can't grow some of the tropical trees here. But it's a great reference book if you want just a wonderful book to really help you learn trees. Yes, Cindy?
Amazon. I got mine from Amazon.
They're available on Amazon. I'm sure our local bookstores have them too. So we're going to talk a little bit more about our tree book. Yes?
About pruning trees.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is there a book you recommend about that?
There are a couple of references, and we'll talk some more about some of the other references. I have a couple of website references for you guys, and we have a handout with those on them. That if you go on the tree walk, we have a handout that has those references.
Should we turn the lights on in there? I don't know how to.
Well, you guys are going to talk now. I have 4 Master Gardeners who are going to come up and talk about each of these bullet points and talk a little bit more about our Trees of Napa Valley book. So you could turn off the lights, I guess. So first person is going to be Meredith Levine, who's going to come up and talk about our star performers and patio trees.
Do we have a copy of the book?
And I just looked, and the library does have the Max Green book. So
Great. That's
get that, they have it there.
I'm not going to use this slide. Can we just?
No, yeah, just talk from that.
Can I have the lights too?
Yeah.
So I can read my notes. That would be good.
I think the lights are really cute.
So my name is Meredith Levine, and I'm a Master Gardener. The book that I worked on this for about a year and a half, and in this book, we are all going to talk. 4 of us will talk about parts of the book that are interesting to us. The part that interested me the most were the star performers and the patio trees. The star performers are trees that have been evaluated by the arborists who work with us as being particularly suitable for Napa Valley. They're the first part of the first bit of the book. You can see these tree names have a little star next to them. And there's about 40 of them, maybe maybe not quite so many. But they have, for different reasons, they have been called star performers. The definition of a star performer, they decided beforehand, was that it had to be a tree that was attractive most of the year, that thrived in Napa Valley and without being invasive, and that was hardy and was disease resistant. So, and these trees, the star performers, also can have some of the following: fall color, attractive flowers, low maintenance, drought tolerant California natives, attract wildlife and pollinators, and also be friendly to power lines. I'm not exactly sure which ones those are, but it says that.
That's what's on the posters.
The patio trees are the ones that I'm going to talk a bit about. Think about California living. A lot of us have come from other places. California living has, as one of the things that we like to do, is be outside. So our patios actually began in the 7th century when the Moors went to southern Spain. And that's where they began, because it was very hot there. So people wanted shade, and they wanted cool water, and they wanted the ability to stop the heavy winds. We make our gardens a kind of a decorative adjunct to our homes. That's what makes patios. The patio trees that they talk about in this book, and it starts on page 40 and goes to page 49, so there's a number of them, and there are more than one per page, have to be shorter than 25 feet at their highest, and they are supposed to be they're supposed to be able to give shade and wind protection. They also shouldn't have messy fruit. The flowering patio trees are my favorites, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. The flowering cherries have a showy double pink flowers in the spring, and other different varieties of flowering cherries also have a glossy red bark in the fall. Crab apples, which are pretty commonly planted, provide spring bloom and also colorful fruit in the fall that animals, birds love. So that's very nice to have if you like birds. I love birds. Then the flowers range from a showy white to pink to red and even purple in some species. And almost all of them have an apple blossom fragrance during the spring. And the third of these flowering trees that are talked about in the book is the flowering plum. In the flowering plum, some of the varieties are the very first, other than magnolias, to bloom in Napa Valley. So you can have the very first blossoms. They're also double pink, fragrant flowers. The tree that I like the most that's a flowering tree is the dogwood. And it's slightly too tall for a real patio environment, but it has beautiful white or cream, large flowers, and there are even some that are red, pink and red in some cultivars. They're followed by small orange-red fruit in the fall that's colorful, and that adds to the colorful fall foliage of the dogwoods. It does need shady afternoon. It needs not to have the full sun of the afternoons in Napa. You may have noticed 2 weeks ago there was an article. We do an article every Saturday, the Master Gardeners, in the local paper. And a couple of weeks ago there was one about this book and about trees in Napa. And in it she talked about 3 of her favorites, which I'm just going to mention again because they're so wonderful. One is the Japanese maple, which doesn't have blooms that we appreciate, but the leaves are just beautiful. The foliage is either a bright chartreuse or a golden orange almost. And they're only 30 feet tall, and you see them all over town. Another very popular tree, and one that the Tree Commission likes to suggest to use, is the crepe myrtle, which can get up to 30 feet tall, but it has a beautiful summer bloom, and right now we see the summer blooms all around. And the third one is the ginkgo biloba, which we could do an entire workshop on. It's like the dinosaur in our lives. It's still alive, but it's been around for thousands of years. And it's a beautiful tree in all ways. Everybody says it's a perfect tree, unless you get the female. So just remember, ginkgo biloba is a great tree. Just make sure you get the right sex. And now, other less well-known interesting trees.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Stroll, and I'm also a master gardener. And I move around a lot, so I'll try to stay right here. I normally don't stay in one place when I speak. I'm going to talk about the section of the book called Less Well-Known or Interesting Trees, or just Other Interesting Trees. And to make it simple, I picked my top 5. And remember back at the beginning of the presentation, Yvonne gave us the senses that we use when identifying trees: the sight, sound, smell, taste, and feel or touch. And so I picked my top 5. Now these are not star performers, but these are interesting trees that might have their place in your landscape. And so the first one I picked for taste, and this is the California buckeye. Does everyone know the California buckeye? It is just a tree that you just go, wow, what is that? Being a newcomer from Wisconsin, I only knew of buckeyes because my husband's from Ohio, and the Ohio State Buckeyes are named for the buckeye tree. They also have their own native version of this tree. And the seed pod of this tree, it's in the horse chestnut family, and the seed pod of this tree, it's considered good luck, so people would carry it in their pocket for good luck. The reason I picked it for taste is because the Indians used to mash up the seed and put it in the river to stupefy the fish. And then they would float to the top and they would collect them. And they also used the seed themselves for food. So that's the tree I picked for taste. For sight, I picked the redbud. There are also eastern and western varieties of this redbud, so it's another native that has its variants in different communities throughout, or regions throughout the country. The reason I love this tree for sight is because in February, usually, late winter, the flowers come out before any of the leaves. So similar to the flowering plum or the ornamental pear, you notice it because it starts to flower, and the flowers are so delicate, and they're small pink flowers, and they cover the branches. They're not just in one little spot where the leaves would be, they cover the whole branches. And a little known, well, unless you're a tree expert, I was surprised to learn that this tree is actually in the pea family. So the flowers look a lot like the shape of a pea, an edible pea, a sweet pea, but they're much smaller, and they're pink, and they're just beautiful. They have these beautiful heart-shaped leaves when they do leaf out. So that's my sight tree. The tree I picked for touch is a very complex scientific name, but the common name is the bunya bunya. Does anyone know this tree?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the dinosaur tree. This is the real dinosaur tree. It looks prehistoric because it is prehistoric. It's from the Mesozoic era. And I first noticed it when I came across these long, spiky appendages on the ground in Tulaque Cemetery. I walk my dog in Tulaque Cemetery, and I thought, what is that? And I tried to pick one up and was surprised that it really hurt. I tried to find one to bring, but they're not in season. This is not the time of year that they fall, and they're very fastidious in Tulaque. They have things cleaned up right away. So you have to watch yourself under this bunya bunya tree, and you will see one if you go on the tree walk today. So the bunya bunya is the tree I picked for touch. It's very tall. It also was a food source for the Aborigines in Australia. So it's another one of those Mediterranean trees, and that's why it does so well in our climate. For smell, any guesses what tree I might pick for smell?
Citrus.
That's a good guess.
Ginkgo.
A landscape tree. That's not the female, right? So I picked the laurel, the bay laurel, the California bay. See, everyone knows now the smell of a California bay laurel. It is a culinary specimen. It can be used for cooking in every kind of soup or stew or braise, often calls for a bay leaf. And there are many, many of them at Connolly Ranch, and I've often seen the preschool classes. The teacher will pick one, rub it in her hand a little, and take it around and make sure all the kids are smelling. It's just a way of drawing them into a sensory experience. They are very beautiful. They're very large, so you have to have a lot of space to have them. But another reason I picked this tree is because it's an indicator species for a very important thing to know about, which is sudden oak death. And sudden oak death is caused by an organism that slowly kills the tree, but the oak tree doesn't show any symptoms. And so we have to look for it on the leaves of the bay laurel tree. And this is done once or twice a year here in Napa. In fact, Bill Pramick, our technical editor for the book, leads what's called the sod blitz. So I highly encourage you to go follow the bay laurels to help us track the sudden oak death spread here. And then finally, for sound. Imagine a tree that thousands upon thousands of bees will hover around, and what that would sound like. I recently learned that the Vitex agnus castus, also known as the chaste tree, is just the top. In fact, at this talk last week at the library, Dr. Gordon Franke talked about this tree as being the #1 performer for bees. So if you want to attract bees with a tree that's just around 25 feet tall, it has sort of bendy branches that can be used to make baskets, the Vitex is the tree for you. So those are my top 5 interesting trees. And next, deciding what to plant, Mal is going to say.
I'm going to be discussing with you this evening the portion of the book that begins on page 104. It's in a spreadsheet format, and I don't know how you folks are, but when I get too much information on a subject, I tend to shut down. So this is excellent for me because it gives me complete, concise information in an easy-to-read, not overwhelming format. And we suggest that if when you're looking for a tree or looking for information on a tree, this is where you want to begin, because it's easy, it's quick, and it gives you little footnotes so you can know where to begin. If they are in their alphabetical order of their Latin name, I'm not good on Latin names. So if you go back in the index of the book, it gives you the common names, and then it directs you to where the Latin name is. These trees are picked because they thrive in our beautiful Napa Valley Mediterranean climate. And the information is laid out as follows: height and canopy in feet based on a tree approximately 15 years old. If you have an evergreen, deciduous, if it flowers, if it fruits, drought resistant, does it give you fall color, and a comment section. There's also a section for star performers, as Meredith spoke on. There's a section with plus marks for those trees that are considered just extra special, and a minus for those trees that maybe you better rethink your decision. An example would be, so you're in here and you're reading along and you see the notation invasive roots. Well, you know you don't want to plant that near your sidewalk or your plumbing, or you're going to have problems. If you decide on an evergreen, that's great. You'll have greenery all year long, but keep in mind you'll have debris all year long as well. If you want winter sunlight, deciduous is the way to go, because that's when the tree is bare, except for the native California buckeye, which is a summer deciduous. If you have an area in your yard that is constantly wet, there's a notation here for trees that actually like that. And they bring up different cultivars. It gives you more bang for your buck in our area. So once you've got your list compiled, you can go back to the meat of the book and look up complete information on that particular tree. So take it out, give it a test drive. We think this information is very valuable.